Alright, we're live. Hey everyone, Mr. DVB here. In today's video, I'm going to be discussing Disney Star Wars. So, a few nights ago, I was live streaming the exact same video as what I'm doing now, except I didn't really know what I exactly wanted to say, and the video was kind of just a jumbled mess. This video is still going to be somewhat messy because I don't have a script, but I do have all the topics I'm going to be discussing written. They're on my TV, so if you ever see me like picking up my PlayStation controller and scrolling down, it's because I'm looking at all the stuff I wrote. But yeah, I don't exactly know why I wanted to make this video. I haven't really been into Star Wars, to be completely honest, for a while, for like the last 10 months or so. I just haven't really cared all that much, and a lot of it just has to do with Disney Star Wars, the bad stuff about it, which I'll be discussing in this video. But yeah, I'll just start off. I guess the opening thing I'm supposed to talk about here is, how I felt going into the Disney Star Wars films. So for me, as somebody who grew up with Star Wars, not to sound cliche or anything, but it's true. It was my favorite franchise ever since I was a very young child. So as somebody who grew up with Star Wars and who hadn't seen a Star Wars movie in theaters before, Force Awakens was the biggest cinematic event of my lifetime, right? There was just so much excitement going into a brand new Star Wars film. I didn't know what to expect. Obviously the reviews were good, so I was expecting it to be good, but I just didn't know what to expect from seeing a Star Wars film in theaters. And, I enjoyed it. I didn't love it at first. Over time, I grew to love it more, especially after seeing it a second time. But, that was just a really big movie for me. When it came out on Blu-ray, I'm not even kidding, I probably watched it about 10 times, maybe even some more. Like, I was obsessed with Force Awakens. Biggest movie to ever come out in my lifetime, without a doubt. Last Jedi, I was maybe more excited for just because I had seen The Force Awakens, so now I kind of knew the characters that we had. I knew the story that had been set up. So I think I was more excited to just see where things were going to go at that point. I was more excited for Force Awakens as an event, I guess, but I was more excited for Episode 8 as a movie because it was just, a sequel to this film that I had loved, and it was just, continuing on with the characters that were introduced and everything like that. Uh, and then Episode 9, I didn't really have any excitement going into it, to be honest. I remember the day I saw Episode 9, right before seeing the film, I was watching the newest episode of The Mandalorian with my friends, and I was like, all right, I'm looking forward to the movie, I guess, but I'm not like particularly hyped. Probably had to do with, the reviews, but also just the fact that there's just been so much negativity in the fan base ever since Last Jedi came out. And I'm one of those people who, when you have a fan base that you're a part of, and everybody in that fan base is hating on the newest thing, whether it be The Last Jedi or whether it be Last of Us Part 2, that was another scenario I felt the exact same way. It's hard to be excited, or it's hard to love that product or whatever when everybody else is just hating on it already. That's kind of what my thing with Rise of Skywalker was, is that everybody just didn't care. Everybody hated Last Jedi. There was just so much negativity that it kind of just affected how I felt going into 9. Because when 7 and 8 were coming out, right, there's so much hype for those movies. When 8 was coming out, people were like, oh, this looks so much better than The Force Awakens. It's going to be incredible. So you're in a fan base of people who are as excited as you are, and it's just a great feeling. When you're in this fan base where everybody is just hating on, the new Star Wars movies, it's hard to get excited about the new one coming out. And that's kind of just how I felt. Same thing that happened to me with Last of Us Part 2. And Rise of Skywalker, when I first saw it, I loved it. I thought it was great. I recognized its problems as a movie, from a pacing standpoint. I recognized those issues right away. But I think what it was for me is that, just as a Star Wars fan, there's a lot of callbacks in that movie, obviously, and a lot of people like to complain about that. Um, and that's something I'll talk about later on. But, those moments worked for me, right? I was kind of like, just in that mood where I was like, oh yeah, this is ending off this saga, and there's all these things reminding me about what I love about Star Wars, and it all worked for me. And that's how I felt about that movie for a while, until about maybe 3 months later, where I kind of looked back on it, and I was like, the stuff I liked in that movie was when the movie was reminding me about what I liked about Star Wars. The movie itself, I couldn't even really think about what I liked about it. And then I looked into it more, and yeah, I just didn't like it. The pacing's terrible. The plot is really stupid. I don't like that they bring back Palpatine. I have a lot of issues with that kind of stuff. And overall, I just don't think it's a very good film. And that's not something I felt initially, right? Initially, I was just like, oh, I love Star Wars. This is ending it, and it's reminding me what I love about Star Wars. But for the wrong reasons. And that feeling has just grown in my mind ever since. Ever since first started feeling that way a few months after the movie. I'd say probably in about February or so of 2020. And that feeling is just like I said ever since, and it's just grown. And eventually, I just kind of stopped even thinking about Star Wars. I just didn't really care anymore, because I was like, okay, I just didn't like how that film turned out. I watched the Clone Wars season 7 or whatever when it came out, which I liked. At this point, honestly, like at that point, I just didn't care about Clone Wars anymore, to be honest, because I, this show had been canceled so long ago, back in 2013, and I don't want to say I grew over Clone Wars, but I just didn't care anymore about an animated Star Wars show, right? Like, I cared more about the movies, and the movies kind of failed, so I just didn't really care. Like, my interest in Star Wars just slowly died. And I haven't watched any of the movies completely since before Rise of Skywalker came out, which is not normal for me, because normally I watch them all, at least once a year, usually twice. So it's kind of just weird in that sense. But for some reason, over the last week, last even month, I'd say, the kind of annoyance and hatred I feel towards aspects of the Rise of Skywalker has just been kind of coming back. Don't know why, and yeah, I just wanted to make a video kind of just giving my full-on thoughts, because obviously if you go to my review of Rise of Skywalker, in that review I love the movie and I think it's great, and I obviously don't feel that way anymore. And I kind of wanted to make a video to just explain how I currently feel about Star Wars, and yeah, so that's the intro to this video, like almost 7 minutes in, but it's going to be a long one. And I like that I'm doing it as a live stream, because I feel like it can just come more from the heart. If I had a script and everything, it would probably be too scripted, so I'm just finding the balance in between. But yeah, so initially, Force Awakens, really liked it. Initially, Last Jedi, really liked it. Initially, Rise of Skywalker, really liked it. I liked all of them at the beginning. Opinions on them fluctuated over time, but yeah. So how I feel about them now? Well, Force Awakens, let's start off with that one. I think Force Awakens is still a really good film. I think Force Awakens is a great setup movie. I think it was great for getting fans back into Star Wars. I know a lot of fans complained after because when Force Awakens came out, it seemed like it was really liked. I wouldn't say loved, but it seemed like it was really liked by the vast majority of the fan base. All of a sudden, though, at some point, I don't know if it was around the time Rogue One came out, but just out of nowhere, people just started hating on the movie, and it's a ripoff of A New Hope, etc., etc. And yes, the movie is extremely similar to New Hope intentionally, right? Like, it's not like they tried to sneak it. Like, they intentionally made it similar to New Hope to remind people what Star Wars felt like, because this is still when people didn't really care about the prequels that much. Right? To remind people what they loved about Star Wars. They wanted to give us a movie that felt like the original trilogy, because ultimately it was just retelling a lot of aspects of A New Hope. But what mattered most about The Force Awakens, and what I think it did execute at the end of the day, was introducing us to its new characters. I think it did that very well. I really like, oh yeah, ha ha ha, hijack. I really think that Rey, I like her in the movie. I know a lot of people like to complain about her being overpowered and that kind of stuff, which I can certainly see those arguments, but for the most part, I felt like Rey, she was an enjoyable character. I liked Daisy Ridley's performance. I felt like the character had a lot of charisma and a lot of energy, and I liked her character. I thought Finn was a very interesting character. I think that he, just the concept of a stormtrooper gone, who just like leaves that faction and becomes, a resistance soldier. I think that was really unique. That's because that's something that we had seen that with Jedi and Sith before, but we hadn't seen that through the eyes of like a soldier. So it was a really cool concept in that sense. It was unique, it was original, and I really liked Finn, and I especially liked the relationship that him and Rey had. And then we had our villain. We had Kylo Ren, who, I always liked Kylo Ren. A lot of people like to complain about him, that he was really whiny, and I always liked him. I thought he was a really cool character. I liked the idea about him being someone who's very torn, and I think that's something they executed very well. And I think to this day, Kylo Ren is the only character who was done well across this trilogy. He felt like he had a complete arc, and Kylo Ren is definitely the most positive aspect of this trilogy, I'd say. But I liked him in The Force Awakens, and The Force Awakens also, had to bring back the old characters, right? So we got to see Han Solo again. Harrison Ford did a very good job, in my opinion. I really liked him in the role. Leia was back, she doesn't really do much in this trilogy whatsoever, but she was back. And it was nice to have scenes with her and Han again, seeing them reunite. And then Luke at the end of the movie, where I remember just in the theater that was such a cliffhangery, like oh, where the hell is this gonna go? And then obviously we have Last Jedi. So overall, Force Awakens, I've got some problems with it, right? I think the Starkiller base is useless. I don't mind the similarities to A New Hope. I don't mind that there's a person living on a sand planet who wants to go out and explore the galaxy, very similar to Luke. I don't mind that stuff. The stuff that annoys me was basically just, oh, there's another Death Star, because in the originals, in A New Hope, the Death Star, that's the entire premise of the movie. In Return of the Jedi, that's the entire premise of the movie, is the second Death Star. Starkiller Base is kind of just there, right? Like, it just gets randomly thrown into the movie halfway through, not even mentioned once whatsoever. Prior to that, it's just thrown in, and it's kind of random. Uh, and then all of a sudden, the movie's plot just shifts gears to, oh, we have to destroy this Starkiller Base. Luke almost feels kind of sidelined at that point, and that's always just kind of been a bit off to me. Um, but still, Force Awakens, I really like it. I guess my rating for it would be around an 8.5. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's well paced. I think it's fast paced, but not too fast paced like Rise of Skywalker is. And I think it's just an overall really solid, enjoyable film. Then we have Episode 8. Now, Episode 8's job, for the most part, is to take the characters that were set up in Episode 7, explore them deeper, and just progress the story. And I think it does some of those aspects really well. I think that the main trio of characters, in this case, Rey, Kylo, and Luke, everything with them I love. I think that stuff is very interesting. It's just the rest of the movie for me ranges from really average to just kind of boring. I think the whole Resistance subplot where they're being slowly chased in space, I think that kind of sucks. I think it's kind of boring because you look at Empire Strikes Back, which, again, Empire Strikes Back, that's the thing with this trilogy. These movies are basically just remakes of the original trilogy. They have very similar stories, right? Because Episode 5 is about, the Empire, who just lost this big battle in the previous movie. They are now, the movie starts off and they are kicking the Resistance or the Rebellion's butt. And the Jedi character goes off to train. They meet this wise Jedi Master who is not the person they were expecting them to be. And then, the movie ends basically where the good guys have kind of lost for the most part. And then you also very similar movies, like very similar premises. And then Episode 9 is the exact same story as Episode 6 for the most part. So they're very similar. That being said, I think Episode 5 was obviously way more entertaining and way more interesting from the Rebellion side story plot, right? When you're following Han Solo and Leia and all those characters, it's interesting because it's one small ship being chased by an entire fleet. In Lost Jedi, it's a giant ship being chased by a giant ship, and it's just not very interesting to watch. There's nothing going on with the characters that is unique. In Episode 5, you're exploring Han and Leia's relationship. Episode 8, not much really happens. I like Poe in Episode 8. That being said, I don't like the surrounding characters that are in Poe's storyline. Finn and Rose's side plot, that's just one of the biggest complaints about this movie, even from people who love the film, is that their storyline's really bad, right? Like, they go to this planet, we spend like 30 or so minutes just dedicated to their storyline, and it goes absolutely nowhere. So 8 has problems, but I think 8 is a good movie for the most part still. I still think everything it has, surrounding the characters of Luke, Rey, and Kylo is really interesting. I love how, Luke basically wants the Jedi to end, how he's basically kind of giving us the story of, the prequels and, how the Jedi failed and all that stuff. He's, like, the first Jedi to ever really acknowledge that in the movies. He's explaining to us, yeah, the Jedi, they were a failure. Like, they were what led Darth Sidious to power, and it's all because of them, pretty much. And it was really unique to see that coming from Luke. And I also love that he's responsible for Kylo Ren, right? I think that, that backstory where he sensed all this darkness building in Kylo, and so, he goes to him, he's about to kill Kylo, he turns his lightsaber on, and he immediately feels regret. He instantly just, realizes that what he's doing is wrong, but it's too late. Kylo's already awake, Kylo sees that, and that's the last straw. Kylo is now completely gone to the dark side. And I like that because, a lot of fans just freaking hate how they handled Luke in Episode 8. They thought that was the most, un-Luke-ish thing that they could do. because Luke has to be this good guy who wants to train Rey, who wants to take on the First Order, who yada 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 yada, can't have any imperfections. But the thing is, Luke has never been like that. You look at Luke in Episode 5. He wants to go kill Vader, right? Like he wants to go kill Vader because he thinks Vader is some guy that killed his dad. But then when he learns that Vader is his father, that completely changes his character. In Episode 6, he doesn't want to confront Vader. So we've seen Luke, being in fear of something before and not want to go towards the proper thing to do. We witnessed that in Episode 6. So when Luke shuts himself off from the Force, when he doesn't want to go back into that life in Episode 8, it works in my opinion. Same thing with Luke almost killing Kylo, because in Episode 6, when Luke's fighting Vader, he cuts off Vader's hand and then he almost kills Vader. He realizes, what am I doing? He looks at the saber and he tosses it away. Luke virtually does the exact same thing in Episode 6. He turns on his lightsaber and he immediately regrets it. Right? It's like when people are referring to like how they don't like how they handled Luke's backstory in this movie, they sound like Kylo in Kylo's version of the story, where like Luke's standing there with murderous intent, but that's not how the actual scene went down. It's where Luke turns his lightsaber on and immediately regrets it. So my point is, at the end of the day, I just think the stuff with Luke was really interesting and very underrated. I think that was very unique, and I thought it did some really cool stuff with this character. And that's the thing I like about Episode 8 for the most part, is the stuff with the main trio of characters, with Luke, Rey, and Kylo. It's like this circle of characters who are filled with regret and who are trying to understand themselves more and trying to find their place in everything. All three of them go through the exact same, thing in that sense. Rey wants to know who her parents are. She has the Force. She feels like she comes from something. She wants to learn more about herself and who what her place is and everything. And then she finds out her parents are nobodies. That they were just these junk traders who sold her for money, so they could drink to their death pretty much. And again, that's another great story, another great character idea, because everybody wants, everybody's like, oh, Rey has to be a Kenobi, or she's going to be a Skywalker, or blah, 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 blah. And Star Wars, to me, isn't about, every single character having to be related to each other. It's just about interesting characters in general. And in my opinion, it's more interesting when you have somebody who comes from nothing. Because you look at that, you look at Luke in Episode 5, and I've heard this online before. Some of you guys have probably already heard this, but Luke in Episode 5, when he finds out Vader is his father, it's not just a great twist because, oh, the bad guy is his dad. It's a great twist because that's the worst thing that Luke could hear. That, like I said earlier, the entire movie, Luke thinks to himself, Vader is this guy who killed my dad. I want to go kill Vader. But the second he finds out Vader is his dad, that changes his perception. He no longer wants to confront Vader, and that completely changes his character. Same thing with Rey. All of this time, she thought that, her parents were going to be these very powerful people, these Jedis or whatever. So when she finds out that her parents are nobody, it affects her deeply. And that's just, again, it's a unique character standpoint. It also kind of just has a message behind it, right? Like, you don't have to be related to anybody big to like make something out of yourself. And I just, it just works in many different standpoints. So when 9 just makes her Palpatine, it's just there so that fans can have, her related to somebody. But it also doesn't work because when she finds out she's a Palpatine, her character doesn't change whatsoever, right? It's not like Luke, where Luke's like, oh, this changes everything. Rey, she still kills Palpatine at the end of the movies. It doesn't change her character in any way, shape, or form. So it's just stupid. But anyways, continuing on. Overall, 8, really like it. I think Kylo Ren's great. I love when Kylo kills Snoke. I think that was a really great scene. That's probably one of my favorite scenes in the movie. I think my favorite moment in Episode 8 is when Kylo and Luke have that confrontation. Just that whole final act with Luke, I think, is awesome. And while to this day, it does kind of feel iffy to me how Luke just dies from, like, using the Force, I do think his actual death scene is fantastic, right? Just having him looking at the twin suns and then disappearing. I think that's, like, visually and symbolically perfect. So yeah, overall, 8, it has its issues with its side stories, but I think the main plot, which is, in my opinion, about Luke, Rey, and Kylo and all those 3 characters, I think all that stuff is almost near perfect, in my opinion. I really have almost 0 issues with those things. So overall, 8, not as good as 7, in my opinion, as a film, not as fun. I think that 8 is definitely slower, but I think 8 has some really interesting conversations, some really interesting moments, and some great stuff between its main characters. And then we come across Episode 9. And obviously 8 had just gotten so much backlash from the fan base that, Disney, rather than trying to continue the story that 8 had set up, they decided, nope, we're going to basically make an apology movie where we're going to try to make it feel as Star Warsy as possible. So we're going to bring back the main villain from the original trilogy and from the prequels. We're going to have Palpatine in the movie. He's alive and he's the main villain because that's a Star Warsy thing. We're going to have an army of planet destroying Star Destroyers because that's like Star Warsy. We're gonna have Rey be a Palpatine, yada yada, and it feels so forced and it feels so lazy because none of that was set up, right? If Palpatine is going to be the main villain and he's behind everything, that should have been in this trilogy since at least Episode 8. That should have been something that was set up. But this movie basically has to set up, everything that happens in it in the first 10 minutes. And it just annoys me so much because, you have your story with Episode 7 and 8 that was kind of progressing. And even though 7 and 8 don't perfectly match up, I never felt like Luke throwing the lightsaber behind him was something that was supposed to happen. That always just felt like a very random thrown in thing. And the humor in general in 8 is pretty terrible. But 9 feels like it's basically just setting up its own trilogy, right? It basically, 9 is a trilogy condensed into one movie. And that's what sucks about it. Like, it's so rushed. The first 45 minutes of that movie just go by so quick. There's so much that happens in those first 45 minutes. I was thinking about it, right? Palpatine gets introduced 3 minutes into the movie. We find out he's alive in the opening crawl, or in Fortnite, which is stupid. But the main characters leave on their journey 17 minutes into the film. You look at other Star Wars films, you look at A New Hope, Luke doesn't leave Tatooine until 1 hour into the movie. You look at Episode 5, right? Han, Leia, all those characters, they don't leave Hoth until about 40 minutes in. You look at Episode 6, they don't leave Tatooine until about 30 minutes in. You look at Episode 1, they don't leave Naboo until probably 45 minutes. You look at Episode 2, they don't leave Coruscant until about 30, 40 minutes in. You look at Episode 3, right? Each Star Wars film takes its time before the main characters go on their journey because they have to set up everything. Episode 9 just throws you into it. 15 minutes in, the characters are getting on their spaceship, they're saying their goodbyes to everybody at home base, and they're going out on their journey. And the journey of Episode 9 sucks. It's literally, we need to find this thing, which will then lead us to another thing, which will then lead us to Palpatine. That is virtually the story of this movie. It's just a bunch of fetch quests chained together. And it's just really uninteresting, right? Because that's just not fun to watch. Star Wars is not about finding, this thing which will lead me to this thing, which will lead me to this thing. It felt more like a knockoff Indiana Jones than it did Star Wars. Star Wars should be the story should be focused on progressing the characters, and that just doesn't happen here. And it sucks. It's really lame. So that kind of covers part 1 and part 2, where I am basically just going over those topics. Now let's talk about just the characters in general and how their arcs are all concluded. So we look at Rey in Episode 7, who, like I said, I really liked initially. I think Rey in Episode 7 and 8 was a good character. I think in 8 she's a little bit, I wouldn't say less interesting, because I think, technically speaking, she's more interesting since we're exploring her character more. But I think she's less energetic than she was in 7 because she's not, being placed in all of these really, fun, exciting sequences. A lot of her stuff is more character-focused, and a lot more dialogue-focused. But again, still a very good character across 7 and 8, in my opinion. Episode 9, I think, really just does a disservice to her character because she still has, her fun attitude, I guess, that was present in the previous 2 movies. But as an actual character, the whole Rey Palpatine reveal just does not work, in my opinion. I think it feels so pointless because we had literally in the previous film established she is a nobody, so for them to just go ahead and say, oh no, she's actually a Palpatine, it feels pointless, especially because it doesn't actually change her character, whatsoever. Nothing happens to her after she finds out a Palpatine. It doesn't change her as a person. She's the same character, so it's a really pointless change. Then we have Finn. Now, Finn was a character who was very, very weak in The Last Jedi, right? It's not like Rise of Skywalker is the movie that ruined Finn. Finn wasn't very good in Episode 8. He wasn't given much to do there. Episode 7, Finn was great. Episode 8, he wasn't. Episode 9, Finn's even worse in my opinion, because he basically all he does is yell Rey a bunch of times, and he's almost there for like comedic relief. And then there's Poe. Poe to me was kind of always a very side character, right? Like Finn is kind of a side character, but Poe is even more of a side character. Episode 7, he's kind of just gone for the majority of the film, and then he just shows up at the end. Episode 8, I do like Poe. I like kind of the idea of Poe's character in that movie, where he's like kind of like a hothead, but he's also understanding like what it's like to become a general. I feel like 9, Poe, it's kind of weird having him be with the main characters, because it feels like Poe, since he's supposed to be like the general of the Resistance, it feels like he should be with the Resistance, not separate. That's something I always found kind of odd. I still like Poe in Episode 9. I do think he's a decent character there, because I don't think he's a character that ever really had a lot more growth to go, right? I feel like 8 kind of gave him his arc. I think 9, they could have just continued with that a bit more, but 9, they sort of just make him, more of like a character that just joins the main ones on their quest, which, I don't know. But I don't think he was, like, wasted potential. I think Poe kind of served his purpose in this trilogy for the most part. Although I would have liked to have seen, again, some more general stuff with him in Episode 9. And when I say general stuff, I mean him as a general. And then there's Kylo. Kylo's the only character I think was done well across the entire trilogy. Episode 7, he's like, he starts off actually pretty, like, I think Kylo is kind of reverse Vader, because Kylo, from the beginning, Kylo seems very confident, and then as the films go on, I feel like his character, kind of weakens, right? In Episode 7, he's like this pure evil character, but then when he kills Han, like, that's the moment where his character changes, and he starts to kind of break apart. And then in Episode 8, he's very conflicted. He kills Snoke, and I feel like that's kind of supposed to be the point where it's like cementing him as the main villain. But I feel like Kylo was a character who's just so back and forth, where it doesn't really matter how they handled him, right? In Episode 9, he could have stayed bad, or he could have gone good. It really wouldn't have mattered either way, because it kind of would have fit, because he was a character that was just always so torn. I don't think that's bad writing. I think that's just how his character was designed. And I do like his arc in Episode 9. I do think, while I find that he is extremely underused in 9, I feel like, what happens with his character, especially the scene with him and Han, I think that was great. I think that was a very great moment in the film, probably the best moment in the entire film, in my opinion. But I feel like that was a great scene, because it felt like, the right way for him to go good was for him to, like, kind of relive that Han moment, but from a different view. I love the way they wrote the scene. I think the whole, when Kylo is trying to say, like, Dad, I love you, and then Han's like, I know. Yes, it's fan servicey, but I think it's fitting. He throws his saber into the ocean. All very strong stuff. And then Kylo's character kind of just goes downhill from there, in my opinion, right? His last words are, ow. He dies in a really stupid way. I don't think he really deserved to die. I think his death sort of just felt like them being, oh, well, he was the bad guy in the previous movie, so we have to let him die. I don't think he needed to die. I think he could have lived just fine. And I think his death in general is kind of stupid, where he, I guess, dies from giving life to Rey. Like, he sacrifices himself, whatever. It is what it is. But again, he's still a great character across all 3 movies. I think he's underused in 9, but I still think he's good there. So yeah, that's really what I think about the characters. I think the characters, for the most part, they were, like, they were mostly weak. They started off great, and then they just went nowhere. Kylo's the only one who I actually felt like had, for the most part, a satisfying arc, right? They didn't get the ending of his character right, in my opinion, but they got the majority of it well done. I'm trying to think of what else there really is to say about the characters. As far as the OT characters, I like what they did with Han. Leia, it's hard to really do anything with, obviously, since Carrie Fisher sadly passed away. So I feel like they did what they could with her. I feel like Luke was underused as hell in 9. I feel like one of the problems with Luke is that, I think at the end of Episode 8, while Luke dies, I don't think that's the end of his story. But Episode 9 basically just says, yeah, that is the end of Luke's story. I think they could have continued with Luke in 9 as a Force Ghost. I think we could have seen him training Rey. I think we could have seen him and Kylo have some scenes, which I'll get into later when I talk about the Colin Trevorrow script. I don't like how they just have Luke basically for 2 scenes in the movie. One of them, he basically looks at Rey for about 5 seconds at the end of the movie. The other scene is virtually his only scene in the movie, Which, by the way, is a really stupid scene. Or not a stupid scene, but it looks really freaking weird. Like, the scene where him and Rey are on Ahch-To, that was obviously a scene that they had filmed with it, like, 2 months before the movie came out, because the whole Rey Palpatine thing was added in very close to the end of production. Like, that was added in, I believe, like, 3 months or so before the movie came out. So, that whole scene with Luke, he's clearly wearing hair extensions because he didn't have his hair grown out anymore since they'd already filmed the rest of the stuff. So it's a very awkward scene because he has hair extensions. It looks fake. But then his Force Ghost looks terrible. I don't know what the color setting is set to, but it's way too cyan-like. Force Ghosts are supposed to kind of have like this darkish blue color where they're slightly transparent. But for some reason, Luke is completely transparent. He's like a cyan color. He looks like he was added in a very poorly done way. Like, it looks like a short film. Like, it looks like a fan film, right? It doesn't look good. So it's just very awkward. I do love the moment where he lifts the X-Wing, though. I think that's fantastic, especially because they have the Yoda theme. Again, it's a fan servicey thing, but I don't hate that they do that, right? Because Avengers Endgame gets away with having its entire second act being devoted to them traveling to the previous movies for nostalgia's sake. So I don't really care when Star Wars has a couple scenes in the movie where we get to hear a familiar John Williams score, and, I don't care. It's fine. Like, whatever. So yeah, Luke criminally underused in Episode 9. Alright, so that's all I have to say about the characters and that kind of stuff. Let's talk about concluding a saga. It doesn't do that well, right? Episode 9 doesn't conclude the trilogy well, but it also doesn't conclude the franchise well. Because virtually, like I said, it's telling the exact same story that Episode 9 told, right? There's a new planet-destroying weapon, Palpatine's behind all of it, the movie ends with Palpatine dying. It's the same story, the only difference is that Episode 6 does it way better, because it was set up in Episode 6. It was not set up in Episode 9. The plot in general to Episode 9 is stupid, right? Like, the whole idea of Palpatine surviving, they don't even explain it. And then there's just this giant fleet of, like, thousands of Star Destroyers that can blow up planets. How did they get there? Why are they there? Why is there this ancient Sith dagger that's supposed to be thousands of years old that for some reason, when it lines up with the second Death Star's wreckage, it tells you which area you need to go into in the second Death Star. Because if it's a 1,000-year-old dagger, then how the hell does it know about the Death Star blowing up, right? There's so many plot holes in the movie because it was such a rushed plot where they just try to fit in as many things as possible. There's a lot of what the fuck moments in Episode 9 as well. Like, I hate how Hux is like, oh, I'm the mole. He was such a wasted character in that trilogy. It's just so pathetic. He goes from being kind of intimidating in 7 to being a comedic relief in 8 to being stupid in Episode 9. In Episode 9, he's literally just, oh, I'm the mole, and that's it. And then he gets killed. It's just like, okay, what a waste of a character. Oops, my phone's slipping. All right, so now let's and to talk about the whole Rey Palpatine or the whole Rey Skywalker thing. I don't think that's a bad idea, honestly. Like, I feel like that's something they probably did want to do from the beginning, especially, like, I actually think having Rey be a nobody and then having her say Rey Skywalker kind of works. I know a lot of people hate her character and like, oh, she steals everything about Luke and then she steals his friggin' last name. I think the problem with that scene is that it just wasn't executed well because of the whole Rey Palpatine thing. Having her go from a nobody to a Palpatine to a Skywalker is stupid. If you had her go from Rey Palpatine, or if you had to go from Rey nobody to Rey Skywalker, then it's kind of like, she's become this, I think that would be fine. I just think the issue was the whole Rey Palpatine thing was so pointless. And it kind of hurts that ending, because I actually like the fact that we get to see Luke and Leia's Force ghosts. I think they should have thrown in Kylo, honestly. But it is what it is. So yeah, that's, as far as concluding a saga, it doesn't really feel like it does it, because in my opinion, it just retells the same story, but it's not as well told. In my opinion, if you're going to conclude the saga, you have to conclude it in a way that feels, fresh, and like it's kind of ending it off in a new direction, which Trevorrow scripted, and I'll get onto that later. This is going to be a long video. I bet it's going to be about 45 minutes long, not 50 minutes long. Okay, part 4, minor problems and annoyances. Okay, these are just minor things that annoy me about this trilogy. First one is the same lightsaber colors. I don't like how blue and red are basically the only two colors we get to see this entire trilogy. We get to see green in flashbacks, and we get to see yellow at the end of Episode 9. But it kind of annoys me, it's always annoyed me, how we just basically witness blue and red constantly throughout this trilogy. I think the cross saber is cool, but like Rey should have had a double lightsaber at some point. I think in Episode 9, the movie should have had Rey craft a new lightsaber, like the yellow one, for example, and have Luke teaching her, and then she could use that in the movie. I think that would be cool. It kind of just annoys me how it's like blue and red throughout the entire trilogy. Again, not a huge issue, just something that's just kind of like no big final battle that feels epic. Yeah, that's one thing about 9 that kind of annoys me, was that there's no real large-scale feeling moment in that movie. I like the lightsaber fight that they have on the wreckage. I think that was I think that was probably the best lightsaber fight in the trilogy. It has like the least emotional weight in my opinion, but I do think it's a really cool fight because visually it feels like a mix of it feels like a mix of the prequels and the original trilogy. Original trilogy because they're using both hands. It feels like they're putting weight into their swings, but it feels like the prequels in the sense where they're still doing flips and they're jumping really far. So it was kind of a cool mixture, and I like that they're freezing each other's sabers and stuff. Really cool fight, so I'll give them that. But yeah, the final act, it kind of lacks a really cool battle, right? Like that whole moment where like the whole final space battle was a really weak space battle because it's really messy and there's not really, you can't follow what's going on. The part where they're running on the Star Destroyer kind of sucked as well because it lasts like 2 minutes. The red stormtroopers, they look really cool in my opinion. They go nowhere, right? Like they were just announced to basically make toys, and whatever. And yeah, like I didn't want a lightsaber fight with Palpatine because that would just be stupid, but I just felt like there was no big climactic battle. And that's one thing that I will say about Star Wars as a whole, not just about this trilogy, but as a whole, I feel like Star Wars has never really had any incredible ground battles. They've certainly had great space battles, but from a ground battle standpoint, like, troop versus troops, Battle of Hoth isn't really anything special from that standpoint. There's the AT-AT walkers and then the vehicles, which are cool, but I'm talking about actual troopers shooting at each other, like a ground battle. Battle of Scarif was okay in that sense. There's no real strong ground battles, in my opinion, in Star Wars. And I don't know why. So that's one thing. The new planets in this trilogy annoyed me. There's only about 3 that I really liked. I thought Crate was really cool. I know a lot of people are like, oh, it's like Hoth, but it's salt, and there's the really cool crystal caves beneath it. Thought that was visually really awesome. I like Octu. From an environment standpoint, it's not the most unique, but I do think like it's a location that they visit a lot in the trilogy, like just the island and stuff, and there's some cool places on that island, so I like that place. And is there any other ones that I like? I think that Jakku, Pasana, those are all just repeats. Yeah, maybe that's actually it. I don't think there's any other planets I like. Oh, the casino planet. Well, I don't like the casino part of the movie. I do think it was kind of a cool idea. It just doesn't go anywhere. But anyways, so yeah, my biggest problem with the planets in the new trilogy is that they all just feel like these very generic planets, right? Like, okay, sand exists, so we're gonna do another sand planet, right? Like this, it's the 2010s, the 2020s. You guys have the budget to make some really cool visual effects. The problem is, you look at the prequels. Obviously, they've aged a ton from a CGI standpoint. I think we've gotten to a point in film history and in visual effects where we can create these heavily CGI heavy planets and not have them age a whole bunch in 20 years, right? Like, I don't think anybody's gonna look at Avengers Endgame and say, oh, that planet looks like shit, because we've just gotten to a point where things look really damn good. Back in 2005, obviously, I don't think we were quite ready. So it just, like, why didn't the new trilogy just go for some cool planets? I think the spin-offs did a good job. I think Corellia, I think, what do you call it? That one planet in Solo, Kessel. I think Kessel was cool, right? Like, it uses a mixture of practical and CGI. It looks really good. It doesn't feel like it's something that you could find on Earth. I think that's what Star Wars needed to go for. It needed to make these planets that felt like they weren't something you could just find on Earth. But the problem was they just went for a lot of really generic locations. My back is really itchy, so I apologize. I'm scratching it so much. But yeah. Okay, this one is actually more so of an issue, right? Like, the other ones are mostly nitpicky things. This one does annoy me. I think 9 made a huge mistake when Rey hears the voices of the Jedi. Why the hell did we not get a scene where she actually sees them, right? That I think people would have liked Episode 9 a lot more if we had seen the Force ghosts of Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, Luke, uh, Yoda, Anakin, like all those people together. And yeah, it would be kind of fan servicey, but I think it would be fitting at the same time for that moment. I just don't know why we didn't get a scene like that. Because I think that would have definitely helped a lot of criticism and stuff. Like, I feel like, you know, some fans, like prequel fans who hate the new trilogy, they'd probably forget everything that existed if they had Ewan McGregor and Anakin show up as Force Ghosts. I think that would help a lot. So yet they get their voices. It's like, what, you get their voices. Like, how stupid you have to be to get their voices, but not get them in person. Just in the, like, fucking so stupid. Anyways, another thing, I love Kylo Ren's mask. I hate how they bring it back in Episode 9. It looks great, by the way. I love the red cracks, but I hate how they bring it back for like 5 minutes. Right? He rebuilds it. He wears it for about 2 scenes, and then he just takes it off, and it's gone for the rest of the movie. It's like, what the hell was the point of bringing it back then? Leia's silhouette. Okay, when Leia dies, the silhouette of her lying down looks really bad. It just doesn't look like her. That's always annoyed me. The dumb kiss at the end of the film, that's stupid. The last word of Kylo Ren being ow. And this next one is an actual issue. Force healing. Really stupid, should not be in the films because it just brings up a lot of issues and a lot of questions. It felt so thrown in to just have Rey randomly have the ability to heal things and give life, because you look at, you know, basically every other single Star Wars movie. Oh, Obi-Wan could have healed Qui-Gon. Oh, Padme could have been healed. Oh, this, that, right? There's so many moments in Star Wars history now where it's like that character could have just been saved. So that's the one thing that they just introduced that should not have been there because it just really doesn't work. And yeah, now I'm just gonna to cap this off. 2 more things. The next one is gonna be the Trevorrow script. So for those of you who don't know, online you can find the original script for Episode 9 back when it was called Duel of the Fates, and back when it was going to be directed by Colin Trevorrow, who directed Jurassic World. He was the original director attached to Episode 9. I believe he was fired in, I want to say 2017, and they brought on J.J. Abrams to make the movie and to make Episode 9. And then the film completely changed because, you know, originally it was a different film. And this script is from December 2016, so it came out like a few days before Carrie Fisher passed away, so obviously things in this script would have had to have been changed. But, you know, if you actually, and you can find the entire script, and Colin Trevorrow has confirmed that it's real. And when you read this, it's sad that we didn't get this version because it is so much better. And I still have problems with this script, but it's just like, it feels like a continuation of 8. That's what annoys me about it, is that it feels like it continues what 8 had set up, right? And because of that, it makes it like, even though 8 and 7 don't feel they completely connect to each other, like they still connect well, but there is some, you know, things that feel off. This and 8 feel like a continuation. So overall, the trilogy would have been better. It would have felt like a trilogy. But the problem is, obviously, like the Episode 9 we ended up getting, it just makes it seem like, you know, it's just a mess, right? It's a trilogy that's just all over the place. There's no coherent story. And I don't know why you would buy this massive ass franchise and not have an idea about what you want to do for the story. It's stupid. But Trevorrow's script, I mean, for the most part, like, let's just start off with this. Palpatine's not in it. Okay, that's a big plus. Kylo Ren's, you know, was more interesting in my opinion because he has more screen time, it seems like. I'm trying to think of, like, what I actually want to say here about the script that I liked, because there's a lot of stuff I liked about it. Coruscant was the main setting of the film, and the basic plot was that underneath the Jedi Temple, there was supposed to be something called the Force Beacon, which would send out basically like a distress signal to like a bunch of planets throughout the galaxy. And the Resistance basically want to get to the Jedi Temple. They want to infiltrate it, get that beacon out, so they can basically gain the aid of, you know, millions and millions of people, so they can all come together and destroy the First Order. And, I mean, it's not the greatest story, but I do think it's better than, oh, Palpatine's back and he has an army of Star Destroyers, and this movie is going to be about us finding an artifact that will lead us to another artifact that will lead us to Palpatine. because that's not a story. That's like a sequence of action sequences that are strung together, right? Like episode 9 really doesn't have a plot. So this at least had a story. And what it did well that episode 9 did fucking terribly was the characters. The characters in Trevorrow's script, they all had arcs. Finn, for example, who was a wasted character in episode 8 and 9, his arc was continued and it was done really well, right? Like they wrap up the whole thing with him being a stormtrooper and turning sides. They wrap up the whole thing with like him not having a family and how there's like those kids at the end of episode 8, those slave children. It wraps up that arc. Rose, who I mean, I don't hate Rose as a character in episode 8, honestly. I think the performance was fine. I just think that she does some really stupid things in that movie. She gets a great arc as well. Like the things that her and Finn do in that movie I love. I like what they do with Rey. I like what they do with Kylo for the most part. He doesn't really get his big redemption, which is a bit of a shame for me, but I do think overall it's much better. So as far as what happens with Finn and Rose, Finn basically, in the streets of Coruscant, he leads this big, like basically like a revolt against the First Order. So a bunch of stormtroopers, take off their helmets, they join in and they help the rebellion. A bunch of civilians fight back against the Empire, and they kind of overthrow the First Order, and it's kind of like that feels like a continuation of Finn's story from Episode 7, where he's this stormtrooper who goes to the Resistance, and he's always running away from war. Now he's running towards it, and he's basically getting a bunch of people to do what he did in Episode 8, or in Episode 7, I mean, where he switched sides, and I really like that. It just feels like a continuation of that arc. And at the end of the movie, after everything is finished and the villains are they're all dead and everything, Finn and Rose basically create this safe haven for a bunch of Force-sensitive children, one of them being that broom boy from the end of Episode 8, and all these kids are basically going to live on this nice little farm area or whatever, and, they're all Force-sensitive. So it finishes off those two arcs, because they're both characters who were orphans, right, and their families were taken from them, whatever, so now they get to create a home for all these orphan kids. So it's capping off that arc. And then Rey, is the person who gets to train these kids. And what I love that episode, that his version of the script did, was it does something that I remember I said this like a year ago. I said that Star Wars Episode 9 should end with the Jedi and the Sith ceasing to exist, because there is no balance if it's just one side or the other, right? Like when the Jedi are like, only when the Emperor is destroyed can there truly be balance. That's not balance. Balance is when there's equal on both sides. And so the idea is that in Episode 9, and it's hinted at in Episode 8, Rey is a character who is kind of in the middle in some ways, right? Like in Episode 8, there's that whole scene where she's having the vision, and then Luke says, "You went straight to the dark." And in Episode 9, when she's fighting characters, when she's fighting Kylo and whatnot, she uses both light side and dark side in that script. And the idea basically was, she actually used a true balance in the Force. She used both sides to conquer the villains in the end of the story. And there's a scene where, again, like I said, I wanted this. There's a scene where she's in this like astral plane, and I think there's Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Luke. It's missing Anakin and Qui-Gon and some of the other characters, but whatever. At least we still get to see Obi-Wan. But there's a scene where she's talking to them, and they basically are saying like, our view of the Force was narrow or whatever. You've taught us something, whatever. And the idea is basically, yes, the Jedi Order and the Sith are ending now, and she's going to train these kids the ways of the Force, not just light side or dark side, but both. And I love that concept, because I felt like the thing with Star Wars is, if one exists, the other is going to exist. So if you just take both of them and you just throw both of them away, or if you combine both of them, then you won't have that power struggle. So 9 was basically ending, going in a new direction for the franchise. We don't need to see that new direction, in a new trilogy where it's like, okay, this is what happens to those kids. But it's just ending, basically saying it wraps up the entire saga, right? Because we're finally getting a closure to the Force and that whole storyline. And I just loved it. It was like, this is all it's cathartic. It works so well. It's, it's great. It's symbolic. It's amazing. It's fantastic. And instead, we get Rey Skywalker and the same rehashed story from Episode 6. It's just, it sucks because, well, I didn't love Trevorrow's script. Like, there's still things in there I didn't like. I don't like how Kylo was apparently the person that killed Rey's parents on the behest of Snoke. that's a dumb idea in my opinion. I think that's really stupid and pointless. Um, but that's like a very minor issue compared to all the problems I have with episode 9. I like how Hux isn't wasted. Because Hux has always been this character who's just all about power and stuff. So in episode 9, in the Duel of the Fates script, he refers to himself as Chancellor Hux, and there's literally like a public execution where there's a traitor and they get decapitated with a lightsaber guillotine. It's like, where the hell is this stuff in episode 9? Like, that's intimidating stuff. That's how I always looked at Hux, is like he's supposed to be this intimidating character. 8 made him a joke. 9 decided to make him a good guy. It's stupid stuff. So they at least continue that here. I think Hux in the end of the episode 9 script killed himself. Like, he uses a purple lightsaber, I think, which is a little bit yeah. But he like he pulls that whole Japanese soldier thing where they stab himself. So it's just like, it was interesting concepts, and I just liked how it felt like it capped off all of the characters' arcs, right? Because Rey finally has her place. She finds out that her last name is Solano or something like that, but she finally finds her place in the story. She's now going to train this new generation of Force users. Finn and Rose, Finn gets to basically make a bunch of stormtroopers change their minds and go over to the Resistance. He also gets to create a safe haven for a bunch of Force-sensitive children. It's just like everybody gets a satisfying arc that they deserve. It all felt like natural progression for their characters, whereas episode 9, Finn, the entire movie, all he does is yell Rey. Poe kind of just does the same stuff. Rey just basically changes her last name. And it's just like, it's like, why can't we have gotten Trevorrow's script? Oh yeah, and there's Luke. Luke was used more in the Trevorrow script, right? There's a scene where, there's a lot of scenes with Luke in the Trevorrow script where he is kind of training Rey and like guiding her and stuff. And at like creating a new lightsaber and these kind of things. And there's also a scene where he's haunting Kylo, where Kylo was on because in episode 9, in the actual episode 9, the one that we sadly got, there's a scene where Kylo, when he discovers Palpatine and he's walking in that dark side planet, there's the giant Sith statues. I like the atmosphere of that scene a lot. There's a scene somewhat like that in the Trevorrow script where it's Palpatine, or not Palpatine, where it's Kylo walking in Vader's castle from Rogue One. He's walking around Vader's castle in the dark hallways. It's all spooky and kind of, it sounded very interesting from like a visual standpoint. And Luke's behind him, and he's like, "See, this is where your path leads, an empty tomb." And so like Luke is kind of there taunting and haunting, Kylo's character, and it's just like, oh, that's very interesting, because I feel like that's something Luke would do. He would, kind of go after Kylo still. And Kylo, in this scene, he finds some Sith holocron where there's a message from Palpatine to Vader saying, if Luke does end up killing me, this is what you need to do. In this scene, Kylo had a beard, kind of to symbol, or like at least stubble, like, symbolizing that like he's been looking for this for a long time. And then basically the message reads him, it realizes it's not Vader, and then it like electrocutes him or something, and it causes like his face to be burnt, so he like melts armor and puts some of it on his face. I don't know how that would look, but yeah, there's like some things like that with Kylo that were kind of cool. And I don't know, like, I just wish we got that Trevorrow script, because overall, like, well, obviously they'd have to change some things with Carrie Fisher's death. Overall, it was just 10 times more satisfying. It did a good job at wrapping up the characters in this movie's arc, or sorry, the characters in this trilogy's arc. It did a great job, in my opinion, of ending the franchise, because it's, it's ending the idea of the Jedi and the Sith. Because that's the thing, is each trilogy has just been about, oh, there's the light side, there's the dark side does something bad, and the light side has to defeat them. Right? Like, the new trilogy literally just had the exact same story and the exact same conclusion as the originals. It didn't do anything new. So if the New Hood trilogy had literally just ended with them ending the Force, like, right, like, ending the light side and the dark side, that concept, then, yeah, it seems like that's an actual end, because that shit wouldn't continue. But they literally just ended episode 9 the exact same way the previous trilogies ended. So they could literally just go back and have another film. Like, they can do another trilogy where it's, oh, the light side and the dark side. It just annoys me. It annoys me how right now, at this point, the only thing fans are looking forward to is The Mandalorian. And I liked The Mandalorian Season 1. I thought there was a lot of filler. I liked it as a show. But it's like, why? Like, it just sucks that the thing that we have to be excited for is a freaking Disney Plus TV show. That's the thing about Star Wars. It's actually being handled well right now. Not the sequel trilogy that brings back the cast from the original films. Like, it's pathetic. Anyways, so to end this video off, I want to say Star Wars doesn't feel special anymore, right? Because to me, Star Wars was a special franchise. I look at the MCU. There's an MCU movie every year, not in 2020, but there's an MCU film every single year. 3 every year for that matter. And they're always fun films, but in a way, they're kind of one and done, right? Like I watch MCU films, and I feel like I'm kind of done with them afterwards. Like I haven't watched Captain Marvel since watching it in theaters. I haven't even seen Endgame since watching it in theaters. Like you watch those movies, they're fun, but I don't think they necessarily have a bunch of rewatchability to them. Because they all are virtually very similar films. Star Wars, on the other hand, is something it's special to me. It always has been, and so I felt like if they hadn't made spin-off films, right? Because that's the thing is, literally, 2020 is the first year since 2014 that we haven't had a Star Wars film. 2015, we had one. 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. We have had 5 Star Wars movies over the course of, like, 4 years, and it's dumb. It's oversaturated as hell. I wish they waited 3 years between each of the sequel trilogy movies, just like they did with the originals and the prequels, to get a story and do the right things. But instead, they just did 2 years. And even if they did want to just do 2 years, don't have spin-offs in between. They could have easily just made those spin-offs in 5 years. But the problem is Disney got this franchise. They wanted to just make as many movies at once so that they could just make as much money. And I don't blame them, right? It's not like, oh, screw Disney for wanting to make money from Star Wars. Why else would you buy Star Wars? Like, it's just the fact that they went into it with no plan, right? They went into it thinking, oh, Star Wars is going to make so much money. So if we just release a Star Wars film every single year, that'll give us, like, 10 billion. But that's not how it works. Star Wars isn't the MCU, right? Star Wars is a franchise that needs breathing. You can't have a Star Wars film every single year or else it gets oversaturated and it just doesn't matter. You need to wait between the films. Because I look at Star Wars, back when Force Awakens was announced and you see the freaking Millennium Falcon in the trailer, it's like, holy shit, that's a Millennium Falcon. We haven't seen this thing in, 32 years. So it's just, like, awesome when you get to see the Falcon for the first time. Even when the Last Jedi teaser happened and you get to see the Falcon, it's kind of like, oh, sweet, the Falcon. But now it's like, who the fuck cares? It's the Millennium Falcon. It's just some ship that we've seen every single goddamn movie for the last 5 years. I don't care anymore. Like, that's the problem with Star Wars. It's just been so oversaturated, so overdone, that it doesn't feel special when there's a new trailer or there's a new thing coming out, because you just know there's going to be even more to follow it. And now I don't know what their plan is. I don't know, because Kathleen Kennedy is such a terrible person to lead Star Wars. I don't think she's an awful human being overall, right? Because she's the producer for literally all 3 of these movies I have in my basement as a poster. Jurassic Park, Back to the Future, Jaws, Indiana Jones. She produced all of those movies. So it's not like she's this awful producer, right? Because she is the producer of some of our favorite movies of all time. It's just that she didn't know what to do with Star Wars. She's creatively, like, dumb. And I don't know why they didn't fire her ass after all the hate they got in episode 8. That being said, I don't think they needed to basically ignore 8's existence. I just think that they need to get rid of her because she fires every single person, right? She fired Trevorrow. She fired the Phil and whatever their name is that were working on Solo originally. She fired the guys from Game of Thrones who were going to make a trilogy, but I don't blame her for that one. And it's like, now are we even getting a Rian Johnson trilogy, right? It's like, are all we going to be getting from Star Wars now is just TV shows? Because that's kind of lame. Star Wars to me isn't TV shows. So yeah, that's the end of this video, folks. I'm starting to lose my voice because I've been talking nonstop for 58 minutes and 28 seconds, but, let me know what you think of the sequel trilogy down below. Let me know what you think about Disney Star Wars. Right? I don't hate the Disney Star Wars films. I like Force Awakens a lot. I think Force Awakens is a lot of fun. I think Episode 8 has some great characters and great concepts. I just think 9 throws all that out the window. Therefore, 8 and 7 are less enjoyable films now because you just know it leads to absolutely nothing. I guess to summarize everything and summarize how I feel, I'm still waiting for that Last Jedi sequel, folks. Still waiting for a sequel to that movie. Thank you all for watching this